Discover how smarter project insights can lead to better project outcomes.
Hello, project people. A very warm welcome to our new episode of the Project Chatter podcast. It's great to have you back. Remember to hit that subscribe button on your favorite podcast player and YouTube if you like to see friendly faces. Not so much mine, but maybe Dale and Martin's. And Dale, can you believe in Victoria we had an earthquake just because COVID was getting boring and dull down here, down under? We thought, why not an earthquake?
I heard about that in the news, and yeah, wow, what a scary experience. Where were you? Tell us, what was happening when this was all going on?
I don't want to tell you, it's too rude. No, I was in the shower. I thought I had too many wines the night before, and the shower got wobbly, and it continued as I got out. So yeah, it went for a while actually. So for anyone who was in Melbourne, that was a bit of a shock. I think it's a warning for all those protesters. So get that vaccine. But I think as well, it was an interesting element because it pivoted the news away from COVID for once, and we got to hear about something new. Thank goodness. So yeah, thank you, Earthquake. Appreciate it. Martin, how are you?
Yeah, good, thanks. Yeah, nothing quite as excited as an earthquake, but yeah, all good.
Stop it. Well, it's good to see you guys again. And look, let's get the important people in the room. Let's welcome our guests today, Lindsay Scott and Eileen Roden. How are you guys?
Very well.
Yeah, very good. No earthquakes here either.
I know, not yet. Yes. It's been a while since we had an earthquake.
Oh, exactly. I have to say, this is the first time I've seen two guests on the same video feed. And, to be honest, since we've been in lockdown in Melbourne, it's so good to see people next to each other. I've been working for remotely so long that it's lovely to see standing side by side there. So if anyone is watching, do check it out. Now, we've got a really lovely topic today because everyone on the call has some level of experience in PMOs. And I'm always interested because I don't believe someone sets out from school or university and says, I want to do PMO. That's the job for me. That's my career and profession. Maybe I'll start with you, Lindsay, and then head to you, Eileen. How in the world did you get into the world of PMO?
Yeah, it's funny when you say that about leaving school or university. I fell into it like most people, certainly of a certain generation. I was lucky enough to just start a temping job for HP, Hewlett Packard, and I just happened to get the job in the project department, and originally a team administrator, but quickly got promoted and started working as a what was called a project coordinator, which is one of the many titles. No doubt we'll get into that on this session, but a lot of different titles, but essentially means that you're supporting projects or programs. And then from that, I moved into a PMO Manager role after I'd been doing that for a few years. And then, yeah, that was it. So I think it's the accidental, certainly for me, and Eileen even more so, because you had a proper job, didn't you?
Well, supposedly a proper job. When I graduated, I went off into IT and undoubtedly ended up in projects, and actually was on a fantastic project. Worked on the privatization of the gas industry, so it gives some indication in terms of kind of how old I am when I did that, and then ended up in HR because I really enjoyed doing HR, which I know is a bit of a jump from IT and IT project management, but went into HR and then ended up doing some forecasting of resource usage on projects and project costing, and then fell into a PMO and thought I'd died and gone to heaven, and couldn't understand why careers teachers had never said there's this fantastic career available. And I think at the time, and Lindsay's the same, at the time we kind of did this, it was, the PMO was very much seen as you go at the PMO, learn a bit about project management, and then you can do a proper grown-up job as a project manager. And I did actually some project management and came into the PMO and have never gone back. And there's no amount of money somebody could pay me now to say, do you want to go back and manage projects and programs? Because absolutely not. PMO is definitely where we're stuck now, and
that's not because that you didn't want the responsibilities of being a project manager.
No, not at all. It's
more that actually the project management role is that you're managing a project and that's it. Whereas with PMO, you've got so many different areas.
You can influence every project. You can get fingers and you can see across all of the different projects and all of the different programs. Potentially, if you're kind of working at an enterprise office, you can actually kind of shape that. And actually, you get to kind of play at organisation level, kind of very, very quickly as well, which is great.
But from our perspective now, when we look at people in PMOs, you not only have you got to get to grips with project management, program management, portfolio management, you've also got to understand business analysis, a bit about the change management stuff, some basic management skills, and then they've got the leadership type stuff, and so on and so on and so on. So there's a lot of different areas.
It's a much broader role.
Yeah, it is. That was the short answer. It's a much broader role than just being a project manager.
Yeah, that's great. And it's great to hear as well, more great people who are passionate about PMO. I always thought the people who ended up in PMO were semi-damaged. Now, I might maybe just talking about myself, but, you know, had a real fixture for control, you know, turning things that are into chaos back into order, managing and organizing. There's a high functional order to what we do in PMO. And for those that don't understand it, it is very difficult to grasp what exactly it is. It's quite different. It's very malleable in certain industries. It's not always standardized across various countries and different types of services. I think just for the audience and maybe for ourselves as well, let's get a baseline definition of PMO. And I know it sounds simple, but I know a lot of people who would debate us on what exactly a PMO is. And you did mention project, program, and portfolio. But Lindsay and Eileen, what is a PMO?
Well, if I kind of, I'll start and then you can do the offices. I think there was some research, and funny enough, we covered it in our book club earlier this week, is that there's no standard PMO across any industry, whether public or private or any part of the globe. So every PMO tends to be different. But if you look at the kind of the P3O definition, it says we're there to do two things: to enable decisions to be made around projects, so making sure everybody has the right information across the organisation and in projects and programmes, so they can actually apply the right governance to projects and programmes. But then secondly, assist in delivery support. And that can go from kind of hands-on support to the project or programme manager, or creating the infrastructure, the ecosystem for making projects work, so setting up the project management framework, etc. So, but we do talk about, don't we, 4 different types of officers.
Yeah, don't get me to say that, because she's just said in that blurb, P30 says, right? So for anybody who's listening to this that's not come across it, it means, and I can get it the right way around, it's portfolio, program, and project support officers, and it's the guidance that came out in 2008.
Well, it came 2008.
Yeah,
redone in 2013, for which I was the lead author.
She was the lead author from 2013. So she's looking at me as if I'm going to give a definition for each one of those types. I'm not going to do that, because you're the author.
But we do talk about in the competency framework, which you know. So we talk about being at a portfolio level, at an organisation level, looking and overseeing across all of the projects. We talk about having a programme office, which is dedicated to an individual programme. Project office, obviously an office dedicated to a project. But we also talk about this kind of centre of excellence, which is the place that develops the standards for the organisation. And what's been, you know, some of the work that we've been doing over the last kind of few years is looking at the differences between whether you're working at portfolio, programme or project level, or whether you're working in centre of excellence, because there's kind of different skills and experience. And the jobs can be quite different in terms of the types of things you do on a day-to-day basis, depending on which office you do. But I think the real challenge comes is that it's never that simple, because people call themselves all types of things in terms of job titles, and the offices sometimes don't actually exist as an office, and are called lots of different things. So you have to dig under the surface a bit to work out whether the offices actually work, or what level the office is working at. And there are some offices, and we have a lovely little kind of acronym we use, which is PO. Yes, if you can be a PO, which is a project office of 1. And when you grow up, you go on the POT, which is a project office of 2. And then gradually you kind of grow into a kind of an office where you've got multiple individuals. But those POs, you know, and it really does feel as though you're dealing with PO on a day-to-day basis, because you end up having to do a bit of everything. You know, you're called from the project manager, can you book me a hotel room? You're called by the chief exec and say, can you give me a list of all of the projects that are running late? you're called by, you know, kind of member of the project team, say, can you come and facilitate a workshop? So you really kind of cover all kinds of things. So PO jobs can be really kind of adrenaline driven, but can be quite a challenge for somebody who's perhaps not fully experienced and knows all of the different elements, and can be quite frustrating that there's not the level of kind of structure in what you're doing and how you're adding value to the organization.
I think the simple answer when people ask me about PMOs, say if it's like my parents or family or whatever, I start by saying that ultimately a PMO is there to help an organization's projects and programs be successfully delivered. And then they'll invariably ask, well, what do you mean by projects? And then that's when you always start going down like, okay, so what are they likely to know about? And I think something like the Olympics comes up nearly all the time, or how to build a bridge, or, you know, all of those things. But actually, I think the reality is that sometimes some of the projects that are being managed are a bit more boring, aren't they, really?
Well, it's interesting because I was doing some work with a supermarket, and my youngest said to me, I don't understand, Mum, why a supermarket would need projects. What is a project? And, you know, it was like, it's a parent's dream come through. I thought you'd never ask. Just sit down while I get my finish on it. You know?
Here's the whiteboard, yeah.
Absolutely, let me tell you. But it's and it's interesting because that is a question, you know, when you're talking PMOs, of actually understanding what it is you're trying to support. Because in some organizations, in order to establish a PMO, you actually need to educate organizations in terms of how you split off projects from business as usual. So, you know, kind of sometimes when you go in there and you kind of, they really, as an organization, have some kind of vague idea, but formalizing that is often the first job of a PMO, to really understand, well, if we're going to, as Lindsay said, just kind of help projects and programs deliver successfully, let's first define what a project and program is, because you can go to the textbooks and find the definition of a project. And I often say, you know, my 5-year-old granddaughter comes home with a project from kind of school on a Friday night, and we don't say, right, the first thing we're going to do is a bit of stakeholder analysis here, Eva May, to kind of find out, you know, kind of who's involved. So you have to say, you know, what's the bar, what is a project in our organization? And therefore, once we've got that established, then we can work out how we can kind of work with the organization to actually kind of deliver that successfully.
Yeah, that's fantastic. I've never heard those poo and pots there, ladies and gentlemen. If you haven't heard that before, head over to Lindsay and Eileen's website. But look, you know, these are great acronyms that stick in people's minds. And I guess that's the idea, is that you learn from acronyms that you remember. And one of the things I thought you bring up that was quite good is, you know, you're not going to go down the route and have a standardized model for everything that fixes everything. You're going to have tailored solutions. Sometimes they're going to be adrenaline fueled. Sometimes it's just going to be, you know, very simple projects. You're not going to have to do a full-on stakeholder analysis. But I like the feedback that you've just given around the PMO space. I guess one more definition before we get into the detail, and I'll hand off to Dale because I know he's chewing at the bit to get involved, is the difference, or at least the synergies between project controls and PMO. The reason I ask is there's a lot of observations now where organizations are now just focusing on project controls as a department. And, you know, they're kind of separating or diverging a little bit from the PMO standard suite, which is sometimes weird and strange. And again, it comes back to education of the organization itself and what they're doing it and why they're doing it. But do you have a definition that kind of splits or unifies those two elements?
So this has been an ongoing kind of conversation between us for a number of years, and some friends of ours who kind of are big in the kind of controls area, and we would see controls as being a subset of the overall PMO suite of activities or suite of services that they can provide, but don't necessarily like to see themselves as part of PMO. But I would suggest, you know, if, and again, a lot of the research as well as some of the manuals say, PMO is not necessarily an office with one manager. If you talk about PMO as a kind of a concept, the finance department provides some PMO services because they'll do some project reporting from a finance perspective, but they would not see themselves as being part of the PMO as well. So I think if I think about a kind of PMO manager or a PMO director, it's about overseeing all of those various elements that go to supporting effective delivery of projects and having a holistic view of how they all interact and how best to structure that So there's no gaps and there's no overlaps between all of the various contributions. So we get contribution from, you know, quite a few of the functional departments, so procurement, HR, as I said, finance is quite key. And it's that overall picture of, well, how do all of these bits come together to support things like the project delivery framework to help those projects? And controls tends to be kind of quite tight-knit department that has quite well-defined services and a function that kind of contributes to the delivery of projects.
Well, and to be fair, I think with project and program controls, you tend to be in an industry where the projects are very well defined, because, you know, we're talking about construction and engineering and things that are really grown up and important. And if these projects fail, it's likely that somebody will die. Whereas, you know, you don't need as much control if it's, you know, it's a more innovative IT or business related type project.
It was interesting. I was talking to somebody this morning about the whole kind of project and program controls kind of certification. And, you know, we were talking about that some of those industries, the construction industry is the classic one in lots of engineering organizations. The kind of the good old skills of work breakdown structures, proper scheduling with baselines, earned value management is absolutely critical. And it's just like their bread and butter. Whereas if you go into some of the kind of the more agile elements, there's new sets of metrics, and that kind of, you know, interestingly, he referred to it as kind of old school. But I said, I still believe, though, that kind of old school, really kind of hard skills around scheduling and planning is going to be here for many years to come, because I might have a very jaded view, but I don't see how you can use some of the kind of the agile and the kind of the Kanban stuff when you're actually doing a huge construction of a big multi-story, and certainly in the UK here where we've got HS2, you know, that is a good, that'll have a full kind of breakdown structure, proper schedule and baseline cost, etc. So the controls is very much, I think, in that industry,
yeah,
as a functional department within a broader view of kind of the PMO function in an organization.
That's awesome. I'd love that you've made that distinction, because I think that's clarified that for a lot of the listeners, you know, because it does feel to have a bit of an overlap, as you say, finance as well. Then some organizations have a commercial team which look after contracts and cost isn't part of controls. It's not part of PMO. And so it does get quite confusing, but that brings me to my thought around the maturity of PMOs and organizations. And I wonder, from your perspectives and organizations you've worked with, are they mature enough to have a PMO? Do they understand it well enough? And then secondly, specifically on PMOs themselves, how mature are we in the space? Do we have I know standards are difficult, but do we have, this is best practice? And I know that's a difficult space to be in as well, because I'll say it again for Val, every project is a unique endeavor with a definite start and definite end. So can you ever have best practice? But it's worth exploring that space, because if we have maybe not best practice or a standard, but a framework in which we can operate, and this toolkit we've spoken about before that you can go to and say, right, for this project as a PMO, this is how we should be supporting it from a finance perspective, planning, controls, risk, whatever the case may be. Is that available to those listening?
So I was going to say, you've covered a lot of things there. So let me just let's do maturity first, and we'll see where we go after the maturity element. So it's under great debate, particularly in academia, about whether there's such a thing as PMO maturity, and if it does, how do we measure it? And there are certain thoughts that say, well, what's the point in measuring? Who cares about how mature your PMO is? Because what we really care about is, can we deliver projects and programs? So, you know, you might have a brilliant PMO, but actually it's not necessarily doing the right things, because you know, that kind of wider culture and kind of delivery capability of the organization is just not there. So there's another kind of stream of thought that says, actually what we should be really looking at is, how mature is the organization and deliver projects and programs? And then your PMO is there. So if you use the kind of the P3M3, the Axelos maturity model, then they would say that to get to level 3 out of level 5, you actually need a PMO in place. You need somebody in the organization who's looking across about how all of those different elements come together in order to be able to facilitate the delivery of projects. So, you know, I still see kind of PMO as a facilitator. And so it's not necessarily how good are you as a facilitation, but it's kind of, are you getting the results you need? So that's, you know, where I am in terms of kind of where we are with kind of PMO maturity. I think in terms when you said, is an organization ready for a PMO? There's lots of different reasons why you would want a PMO. And typically it's because there are questions that can't be answered by somebody already in the organization. So going back to kind of this, you know, kind of being able to provide information. So again, I worked with a very large international supermarket and asked the question, do you have an understanding of all of the projects that are in your organization? No. Which you kind of think, surely it kind of, if I just said, then have you got a list of all of the, or the kind of the top 20 projects in your organization? No. So even though they've got the kind of the business cases in place and they've signed them off, you know, kind of keeping a track of them and having at that portfolio level, they, you know, that's where kind of the PMO can come in and help at a project level. And the project manager says, do we know what resources we need for 3 weeks' time? And are they going to be available? So typically the project plan will have what we need, but that wider picture of resource management, working with all of the resource providers, whether they be internal or external, all of those processes is again where the PMO can come in. So depending on the need, you can have a PMO there to kind of plug those gaps. So you can go from a kind of, as I say, very low maturity of project delivery. We haven't got a framework. We don't know how we deliver projects. They just happen, to kind of an organization which is kind of quite sophisticated. So again, I've worked in an organization where we put in a global resourcing model so we could share resources across the globe. So that was a much more mature organization who had a delivery framework, etc.
I think from our experiences now, I mean, Eileen and I are running House of PMO, which is a professional body for people that are working in PMO. So we obviously are talking to and meeting people from such a wide variety of different industries and organizations and things like that. And it varies a lot. And the interesting thing is that you can be talking to somebody from one organization 5 years ago that were doing quite well in terms of, you know, the things they were providing from their PMO and all going really well. Speak to them now, completely changed, because a PMO relies, but it's got to be in tune with what the business is doing, what that organization wants and what they're doing in terms of projects and programs. So if that business is going through big transformation and change, it means that the PMO must also be keeping in line with that. And it's interesting. They don't always. No, absolutely. And this is what we, that's why something like House of PMO is good for people that are working in PMOs, because there's always somebody else, different organization, probably different sector, but is going through the exact same kind of scenario. So even though we say that every PMO is different, actually, some of the underlying things that they're doing work-wise is not different. And those are the things that people connect on and enjoy learning about. Well, actually, you're in a completely different industry to me. However, I like what you're doing with X or Y, and I think that could work in ours. You know, so it certainly is an interesting one in terms of the whole maturity thing, because it can go up and down.
And it's interesting as well, is what we always say is you will find somebody who works in PMO and you think, you guys have got resource management completely sussed. Oh, I wish we did. And they'll turn around and said, yes, but you've got portfolio reporting really sussed. So, you know, every kind of PMO has its kind of strengths and weaknesses. And it's about, in terms of kind of pulling together best practice is really kind of quite difficult. So there are, you know, kind of a number of certifications out there. So House of PMO do the skills, the P3O talks about kind of setting up and closing PMOs, but all of those kind of tools that you might use and some of the techniques are really kind of scattered at the four winds. And one of the things that we're going to be looking to do at the House of PMO is to provide some kind of repository to help people who work in PMOs at least come and have some kind of register of things that they can kind of look at. Now, we're not going to spend all of our time rating all of those. It's really about kind of having some kind of signposts to all of the various different things that are being used. And one of the classic things that we get asked about all of the time is, which system should we buy for our PMO? Yes, and you know, kind of there's a whole new kind of gambit in terms of, well, unless you know what your PMO is there to do, you know, kind of what the systems allow, you know, kind of going to want to do, then actually there's any number of answers.
I think one of the other things that's worth talking about in terms of the PMO maturity, I think there's a couple of things here. One, they're wanting to know how mature they are so they can justify to the business about their existence. I think there's a bit of that. Give me a number, you know, a bit like the P3M3 assessment. It's we're a level 2.5 and therefore you must keep us kind of thing. But I think actually what they're really looking for is metrics or measures or KPIs or OKRs, whatever you want to, you know, you want to go down that route. That's been a big thing for us, hasn't it, in the last 5 years or so? They're wanting to know, you know, what were the right kind of metrics that we could be using within the PMO to show our performance and what we're actually doing, because we say that we're there to deliver, to support projects to be successful, but are we actually doing that? And that comes back to what's the objective of why we're even there in the first place, which it sounds like it's just, well, that's just common sense, but actually, you know, since I've been around PMOs for the last 20 odd years, it's not, it's what's happened a lot of the time is that an organization wants a PMO, they go out to the marketplace to find somebody to put that in place. That person comes and brings their after experience wherever it is they've worked before, pitch up on the first day and decide to put the same kind of PMO in place that they've always had in the previous places, and they wonder why it doesn't work. And it's taken as a, well, we're still doing it now. It feels like banging your head against a brick wall, but it's like, well, what does the organization want before you start going down the route of deciding what you think is the right thing for them? You know, it's just absolutely crazy.
I think this is the really interesting bit in terms of kind of how the whole kind of concept of PMOs is now becoming much better understood. And we talk about this concept of a support PMO versus a service-based PMO. And I describe it, I always describe a support-based PMO, it's like your kitchen at home. You know, if you kind of, you got your mates around and somebody says, oh, can I have a bacon sandwich? Oh, I've usually got some bacon in the fridge and some bread in the freezer, I can do that. And then somebody says, oh, can I have a duck l'orange? Don't often have a kind of a spare duck and I've got no idea where to start. So, you know, you can come to and ask me for whatever you fancy, but actually I can just do my best effort to kind of do whatever. Whereas on a service based, it's a bit like going to a restaurant where you pick what kind of restaurant. So do we fancy some Chinese food or a bit of Indian or a bit of street food? So you kind of know what you're going to get when you get there. But all of you've got a menu, so you pick from a specific set of things that are being offered, and the kitchens and the storeroom has been suitably skilled up and stored up to match what's required. And what we would say now is rather than just kind of setting up a PMO to do whatever you fancy whenever anybody's going to ask them, really start thinking about, well, why are you setting up? What is it? What, you know, I said, you know, kind of we're there to answer some questions that perhaps the organization hasn't been answered, or back to kind of a problem that we're trying to solve in terms of project delivery. So if we kind of got some, and it may only be anecdotal evidence that we really struggled, you know, there's been lots of kind of issues arriving on projects, and if we'd really sorted out risk management, then actually our projects would have been in a better place. Well, so that becomes quite clear that what you want us in the PMO to do is offer some services around risk management. So what we'll do is we'll make sure that risk management is there in the delivery framework. We'll make sure that risks are reviewed when we do the weekly reporting. So you start embedding, we may even offer a risk facilitation workshop at the beginning of projects to help identify risks. So we never take ownership of that, but we kind of support them. But so what we're trying to do then is saying we've set up for a particular purpose and we're going to help improve risk management across the organization. So therefore you can kind of put some metrics in and we can say, you know, we've got a reduced number of issues, and the issues that did arise, we had risks associated with them and we'd mitigated them. And so there's a direct kind of correlation in terms of kind of how much we've saved. Now, we're not taking credit from the project manager for delivering their project well. What we're saying is we've put in place processes and controls that have allowed that project manager to do a better job. Yes, so the project manager absolutely still needs the credit for delivering the project, but actually, you know, our credit is there because we've kind of helped them do it in the right way. So this whole move towards kind of service-based PMOs and having a service catalogue is much easier then to drive some metrics that don't just report how busy we've been. So we did 27 reviews last week. Well, who cares? Yes, now if we did 27 reviews last week, we identified 5 projects that shouldn't get through to the next gate, means that we've stopped the organization potentially throwing money on projects that are not suitably scoped or managed or resourced to be successful.
Right, have a breather.
Sorry.
Goodness.
Not that I feel strongly about any of this at all.
I love it.
Just to be clear.
I absolutely love it. So I'm just soaking it all up. It's amazing. And, you know, I think, Val, you and I have previously spoken about, you know, incorporating finance and IT and the commercial departments and with, you know, and calling it project services as an entirety and under one umbrella potentially. And maybe we should just use PMO as that brand. But yeah, let's see how that develops. But I love that you spoke about agility and how we need to use that, you know, that service catalog, as you put it. And I think we've discussed before about the pipeline of new talent coming in to the PMO space. We're struggling at the moment. I think there's a limited resource pool and demand's growing. We know governments through the pandemic are throwing money at infrastructure projects, you know, to sort of get the economy back up and running in certain countries and indeed to keep it going in others. But it's an interesting space to be in if you are in project. There's a lot of opportunity, but then you have to look at, you know, what skills do we require? What are the key gaps? You know, you mentioned risk, maybe one area that we, you know, it might be more scarce than others. I see you pointing to a book in the background. We'll touch on that in a second as well, Lindsay. But we've laid a bit of a foundation, and this is where we've touched on it. We've danced around a little bit so far, and we've sort of almost had half of the podcast. But let's ask the direct question now, the topic of the podcast. Now that we've laid this foundation, the definition, what we need, where it fits, how do we get the best out of our PMO?
Me personally, I think people, which is the whole reason why I've been doing what I've been doing over the last 20 odd years. It's the people side for me that really interests me. And Eileen's more of a, you know, it's the trainer, it's the theories, it's the best practice, good practice, and all, you know, all of that kind of stuff. But for me, fundamentally, it's about people, and it's about, like you say, I mean, how do we make sure that they are doing the right job for the right level? So yes, I was pointing at a book. So the people that are watching it on YouTube, you could see me doing that. But podcast-wise, we as House of PMO created something the journey started 3 years ago to create a PMO Competency Framework. And for anybody who's not familiar with a competency framework, essentially most professions have them, and it's about being able to look at what is required in terms of competency in order to be able to do a job. There's never been anything for PMO. There's been quite a few around project management for a number of years, PMI, APM, you know, wherever you're listening, whichever part of the country you are, part of the world, you will find that there's something that's always been around for people that are managing projects, never for those PMO people. And partially why it took 3 years is because of the difficulty that you have different types of PMOs, you know, and those contexts are very obviously different, require different skills and competency. So the competency framework took 3 years. It's actually being pulled together by PMO practitioners themselves and then edited and, you know, and obviously final job through, through the authors. But so essentially that allows people to understand. So if you're coming into PMO, it's, you know, what do I need? What kind of things should I be looking at in terms of getting skilled up? So not only do we look at competencies, but there's also knowledge, skills and behaviours that give somebody that kind of more rounded, abilities to be able to do a job. And to throw in there is that there's obviously different types of jobs, within a PMO. We've said that, earlier, that there's so many different job titles for them. But ultimately, what we've managed to come up with is the first 4 profiles that pretty much fit probably about 80% of the type of people that are working out there. Still work to do on some additional, more specialist type stuff. But there's, the role profiles are there. So if you want to come into the field and not quite sure about what you should be thinking about in terms of what I need to be able to do this job, it's great for that. But actually, we didn't write with that intention. It was about, actually, there's people out there that have been working in this field for a number of years that are still not quite sure, well, you know, have I got the kind of skills and, you know, that I should have? Because this comes down to the pour in the pot again.
Yeah.
If there's only you working within an organization, what are you comparing yourself to? If there's only you doing that job, how do you know if you're any good? So the competency framework allows people to do assessment on themselves against that standard, but crucially allows them to look at the skills gap. So where is the gap between me now and what, you know, I should be doing if I'm performing in this role? And that's been a big leap forward, because it's, you know, I think we're all aware, working in project management, there are so many different courses out there, training courses to do in terms of your development. And it's got ridiculous over the last 15 years. It's just, you know, there's so many. And it's time that we were able, especially from a PMO point of view, it's time that we were able to pinpoint through things like doing a skills gap analysis, but actually, I need X. And I'm not just going to go on to a course that's going to give me a badge or whatever. I'm actually going to target my own development based on the role that I'm in, which is PMO, not project management, but PMO. And yeah, so it's, you know, for me, that's just, it's been brilliant to just have that, because I wanted it. I mean, when we met 20 years ago, we would have, you know, that would have been amazing, because we, you know, we've spent pretty much the last 20 years trying to get
cats.
Yeah,
our favourite saying, isn't it, in terms of trying to get that. And I think that you know, to me, the kind of the competency framework sits very kind of hand in hand with the service catalogue, is because either, you know, and it's interesting in terms of kind of what's the tail and what's the dog, where if you start off with this is what we want the PMO to do, then actually these are the types of people and the skills and competencies we need those individuals to have, or vice versa in organisations. And again, you know, it's where some organisations say, well, you've got Eileen and Lindsay, so let's do a skills assessment of what Eileen and Lindsay can do, and that will determine what level of kind of services they can actually provide. So you can do it both ways. Ideally, you want to kind of say, if this is what you want the organisation to do, this is the resources you need. But typically, we know in the real world, you know, and what we don't want to do is promise services. So you don't go into a kind of an Indian restaurant and say, I'll have some good old UK roast beef.
Would like to talk to Eileen Roden.
Oh, someone else wants to join.
Apologies for that. Stop it.
She's listening, always.
it's wrong.
Be careful what you say.
It is raw indeed. Apologies for that. That's good old Alexa joining in. Yes, so we do know that it happens both ways, but ideally we want to kind of be clear about what the organisation wants, resource it appropriately, and then set the metrics up to match that.
What would you say is the best one? Because I pick people. What's yours the best to get the best out of your PMO?
Know what you want them to do.
Yeah.
And you know, but you need the right people in order to do that.
Yeah.
And as I say, we've worked with lots of organisations who it's kind of, well, I've got this kind of, and one who's a good friend of ours from the flash mob, she'd actually said, she'd gone to the organisation and said, what do you want me to do? And they wanted lots of kind of support at the portfolio management level. And she said, what I've currently got at the minute are some really good PMO administrators, and I can't do all of that portfolio management because they don't have the business skills and the experience, the credibility, the relationships with the people across the business to be able to do the portfolio management bit. So we've got some choices. Either as a PMO, we provide administration and support services, or I have to recruit. And she was actually, surprisingly, she was allowed, well, that's fine. So we can use the admin people in other areas, but actually we will let you recruit suitably skilled and competent individuals to allow us to do the services that we believe in our organisation is going to make a difference in our ability to deliver our projects.
So what's really interesting about that one is she hadn't have done that and just ploughed on and said, we'll try and muddle through. That's when you would have had all those people within that business and their experience of that PMO. 12 months down the line, if they'd moved on somewhere else, oh God, that PMO we had in that last organisation was rubbish. Yeah. All PMOs are rubbish as far as I'm concerned, you know, and it's because of things like that.
And we want to try, we want to do the best for our organisations, yes? And we kind of think, we've been asked to do something, this is our one chance to succeed. And I think sometimes we're a bit nervous about saying, you need to match the PMO capability with what you want them to do. Yeah, and we just kind of, a lot of the times we're still fighting. I just want to get away from this because I really I hate the fact that we kind of have this constant fight about negativity. I genuinely believe that in a lot of organisations now, people kind of think, well, of course we have a PMO. Why would you not? It just makes perfect sense to have a PMO. And that's because projects are much more commonplace in organisations now. People recognise projects, and I do blame Alan Sugar for a bit of that. But this kind of recognition that, even though they might not be able to give a definition of what a project is, they recognise in an organisation we have projects, and somebody needs to kind of be able to pull all of that stuff together in a usable way. And that is a PMO, whether, we call it a project office, a programme office, whatever. Yeah. I think a lot more organisations have PMOs, and whether they're good or bad, it becomes, it's like you wouldn't go into an organisation and not expect them to have a finance department or an HR department. Well, of course we do. And I think PMO is getting there.
Yeah, I
we
agree.
Have it, a lot of people have some, I always say I did the three jobs that people kind of struggle with in organisations: IT, HR and PMO. Yes. So people have good and bad experience of them, but I think they're becoming more commonplace and more expected to be seen.
Yeah, it's a hugely difficult question to answer, how to get the best out of it. And often we find ourselves saying, well, it depends. And I think you said it earlier, Lindsay, it depends what the goals of the organization is, and we need to align to that. But Martin, jump in there. You've been sitting patiently in the background there. Come on.
Yeah, just following on from that theme about the handbooks and good practice guides, if those were to have been available in, let's say, 30 years ago for PMO, what do you think the key differences would be? So what I'm getting at with that is that we've said a few times on this podcast, the reasons for project failure haven't really changed in 30 years. You've got a list of 10 and you just pick 3 different ones pretty much for every project. What would be the learning from PMO over that period of time?
Can I take this one first of all? If you put the investment into PMOs 30 years ago, you wouldn't have projects that were failing left, right and centre now.
Interesting.
Well, because, if you look at a lot of PMO people now, and I like saying, look, can we just have some of the right tools that might cost some money? Can we just have it instead of messing about on spreadsheets? Why are we still cobbling stuff together? And we're talking millions of pounds on these things that are just, it just drives you mad. It's almost like, yes, PMO is becoming more common now, but like you said, if we were 30 years ago, we were, saying that, today, standing here today, I honestly believe that the failure rates would be a lot better. Worse, you know what I mean?
I'm interested to say, because I'm not too sure, because I think kind of project failure is fundamentally because we never want to pay the price to do things properly. Yes, we never want to kind of spend the time to do true stakeholder engagement. It's not that project managers don't know how to do it or don't want to do it. It's just they're pushed on doing other things. And certainly what we've said a few times is the PMO can be there as an organisation's conscience and critical friend. And we've said, the PMO is the kind of person, if the organisation says, does my bum look big in this, we'll say, well, yes, it bloody does. So we're there to kind of say, the decisions you're making have implications. And this is what the kind of the longer term impact is. And we've got no vested interest in the project being successful, or we'd quite like to work in a successful organisation, but we know we're not there as somebody who kind of desperately wants everything to work. We're there to be very objective and will provide that kind of honest response. I think that's one element. I think that's kind of a holistic kind of answer. But I think down on the ground for kind of people who are working in PMOs, I think what's happened over 30 years, I think there has been a complete explosion of tools. So just IT capability has driven the, I remember even things like the introduction of MS Project, and I remember doing planning on a mainframe when I first started in IT. So, just the kind of technology has moved on, and what's coming with that is this whole kind of data analytics. I think over the last 30 years, the methodology, so, you know, Prince 2, MSP, MOP, managing benefits, better business cases, all of those methodologies have all been in my working lifetime. So there's a lot more kind of process and frameworks, you know, which you can kind of say is a good or a bad thing, but hopefully they're all kind of contributing. And I think that kind of what we've seen over the last kind of 5 to 10 years is this whole kind of wholesale adoption of agile or something akin to agile, which again has got new kind of methods and processes, new tools and techniques to learn. So, and that's one of the reasons, you know, kind of I love being in the PMO, is because there's always kind of something new coming out and new things to kind of learn and develop. And I think, you know, Lindsay mentioned before about training, the amount of training courses now to be, and I've just rattled off a few of the kind of the various methodologies. And to me, again, what I love about being in a PMO, it's our job to say, well, actually, there's 20 methodologies out there. How do we bring together what is most appropriate for our organization in terms of the types of projects that we do in our organization? Because I've been in some organizations where, unsurprisingly, it was a council organization, but the guy who was overall in charge of the project delivery framework had never worked anywhere else. And what was worse, his network, he didn't have any network outside of his council. So the only thing he knew was what he kind of had all his life. So we would definitely encourage, and again, part of what we do at the House of PMO is try and say, well, actually, you need to open your mind. There's loads of stuff out there. You have to keep abreast of it, and you have to be able to determine what's right for your organization. And just because it's right this week doesn't mean it's going to be right in 6 months' time, because our portfolio will change. There might be some new theory that comes out that we need to apply and adapt to our framework. So I think it's constantly evolving. And it's going to continue to evolve.
And you can't
so we're saying
you're not skilled.
No.
So we're saying it's evolving, and I'd agree. Over the last 30 years, technology probably is the biggest driver. If I challenged that and said, what would be the biggest change over the last 5 years, let's say, or has that changed with the pandemic? How has the handbook kind of evolved with the change in times?
The two things that I would say, agile has definitely been a big change in terms of about how projects are delivered, but also then in terms of how they're supported. And I think the other one, which I think we're on the cusp of, and some people are already there and are looking into it, as the whole kind of data analytics, this whole kind of concept of how do we use big project data to help us be successful.
So I'm going to bring in Val after this, but how do we, you've mentioned data analytics, artificial intelligence, it's his favorite subject. Every pod I've sat in on over the last 9 months has mentioned the power of soft skills. And you mentioned at the start of the pod, the criticality of good planning skills for some of the major projects over the time to come. And Eileen, you've mentioned people skills to enable PMOs. How big of an impact is data analytics and artificial intelligence going to have in the next 5 to 10 years, in your view? And Val, please chip in.
It was interesting. Once a year, we do something called PMO Manager's Lunch, and we get some kind of people together around the table, ply them with food and wine, and then suck their brains out to get kind of areas that their expertise. And we did one just at the end of last year around this kind of very subject. And what with the resounding message is that the data analytics are great, but you need the people skills to be able to translate them into something useful.
So yeah, so we go down the route of talking about things like storytelling and, you know, data visualizations and all that kind of stuff. But I think the other thing that came out of it is that actually the PMO will act as a translator, but also has a job in order to be able to try and build the data culture in project management and in project delivery, because a lot of the time that's not there. We get involved and support and sponsor a data hack, don't we? That and the overriding thing, so the overriding thing there has been actually the data is always rubbish, always. So we can't do any kind of meaningful analytics if we can't get the data right. So actually, from a PMO point of view, where we are now, I wouldn't say it's a burning thing. It's not a big bang. Oh, it's like agile. I think it's going to be a slow burn because it requires some kind of investment ultimately. One thing we did identify is that actually you might be better from a PMO point of view in looking around doing some kind of innovation or experiments, if you're that kind of organization. But it's more likely to be robotic process automation, because actually, if you look at some of the things we do in PMO, certainly in terms of things like reporting and taking information from this, and this, and putting it into that, we can see how automating those processes might be a quicker win, potentially less investment, and something that ultimately the PMO could do.
But then frees you up some time to be able to look at some of the longer
data stuff, because this data, it feels like a mess, a chaos. And I think the problem we've had is that we had a bit of momentum, and then the pandemic hit, and it's like people have gone back to quickly to reprioritize the portfolio. Let's look at the bread and butter, and the whole idea of having time to experiment and to innovate, and it's just gone out the window for now. I'll be honest, that's my honest thoughts, because when we, the momentum was lost, I think, even though if we'd been in a different position, we would have been really good, actually. The pandemic hitting, we would have been in a better place.
But you should have just delayed the pandemic for a couple of years, wouldn't it? It would have been better.
Yes, but it is what it is.
Yeah, poor planning. Yeah, definitely poor planning on the COVID pandemic. Martin, did you have any more? Or are you happy for me to head in? No, great points, ladies. And I think, you mentioned people, and I just wanted to backtrack a few things because I was listening attentively. And I guess with PMO, from my understanding, is it can't be a franchise because it does need to be a tailored approach, and you do need the right people. And then we talked about best practice, and I don't know about anyone else on the call or anyone else listening, but I'm a bit tired of hearing of it. Best practice. I think what we really are trying to say is good practice. And I'll take a leaf out of Dave Snowden when he mentioned this to me.
I would go once more than that, Val. I would say good local practice. Because
good local practice. Yeah, fantastic.
You are in your organization. It's not necessarily what's going to be good practice in another organization because of that kind of context. Yeah.
That's really well said, Eileen. I think that's right. I think when we say best practice, it sounds like a consultant trying to sell you something, and it misses its meaning.
What's the definition? What's your definition of good practice?
Well, I think good practice is assessing what the project is to date, all right, and working out what's worked on previous projects. And this is coming to my lead question, which I'll follow in, and I'd love to get your input on this, is some of the issues I have with success rates, and I think Martin touched on it as well, is we don't really know the correlation between a successful project and PMO's influence on that success. So I'm kind of thinking of it, I do basketball coaching. I'm thinking Michael Jordan, and then PMO would be the assist, the Scottie Pippen or the Dennis Rodman, I'm thinking like the real Chicago Bulls, right? This is how old I am. But if you don't know those references, you might not know, you'll have to Google it. But what I'm saying is PMO is an assist team. We're not necessarily the star of the show. That's probably the project manager, the director, the delivery, the guys that do the real work. Let's say we are an auxiliary function of that, a service support or a project services team. But when you look at all the institutions that make a phenomenal amount out of these certifications, these methodologies that they sell, there's definitely an increase if you look at the number of SaaS companies that are now selling services within this market. What you look at when you see these stats is qualitative data. So all we have to judge whether or not a project's successful, and we have qualitative, we have an iron triangle. We say, well, a project's successful, and I'm not sure if this is the right measure, but time, cost, quality, right? But when you go and look at the data is a qualitative interpretation of a self-assessment. So it's basically saying, how did you feel you delivered? And you say fantastic, or you didn't. And then they summarize that information. And just if you Google now, and this is the challenge I have is, one organization is saying, we have a 64% rate of success on projects because of PMO, and other project disciplines. Another project saying, we have 36%. Another organization and institute, I'm not going to name them obviously, saying 19% success rate. It's very hard for someone who, like me, is a data guy, and we want to know our contribution to that success rate. And arguably, I think the PMO team has a pivot position between the strategic objectives of the business, the outcome of the company, which is to either drive profit or growth or innovation. And then the deliverable pass, the tangible outcome of that is delivering the project. And so I guess the quantification of that should be within the PMO, but we don't really have a really firm set of analytics we can go to. In terms of your book, I know you did some research on PMO in general. where's your go-to guide for kind of quantitative analysis on the success rate of projects, and then how much of the influence was determined by PMOs?
So I think let's take a step back from kind of where there is, because I'm not sure there is a kind of a go-to. I think the theory is essentially you kind of do that kind of benefits map that says, if you want these outcomes, then we deliver these services. And in order to deliver these services, we need to kind of set up this infrastructure. So you do that kind of correlation between what you've asked us to do is starting to drive the right behaviors, is starting to make a difference. And I do think that there needs to be a level of objective assessment of project success rather than a subjective assessment. And when you look at some of that objective assessment and looking at kind of that causal link is where the PMO comes into play.
Yeah, fantastic, Eileen. And Lindsay, anything to add to that?
I will always say that this has been another subject, hasn't it, that we've covered in one of our reports about metrics and measures. Yes. And it was interesting when we sat down to talk about this with PMO practitioners, and they invariably come up with metrics that are about the project success rather than the role that they've played in that. And it's still one of those subjects now that that people still ask about. But there is a report on the website about it, because I'm trying to think on that graphic that we have.
Well, the metrics and measures.
The different metrics and measures, because there's loads of different things I think you do.
The other thing, just kind of, which we talked about kind of key results areas and how we could kind of demonstrate we were moving towards that and aligning the KPIs of the PMO to the KPIs of the organization. But I think the other thing is, and it's interestingly, because it's just starting to it's just pinging in my head a few things here, about actually there are measures around process efficiency and effectiveness. Now there's that, and I've only just, you've only just pinged that in my head, Val, but I think that would be where we can demonstrate that we've put in place, and I talked about it as a causal link, but you could quantify that by saying, well, actually, it's the PMO who's determined these processes to deliver projects and programs. We could measure their effectiveness. Now, P3M3 will say they do that, and they call it project and program management maturity. But I'm sure in the kind of the old Lean and Six Sigma world, there are some specific measures about the effectiveness of projects, effectiveness of processes, which I think we could apply. Oh, there's a PhD study for me. Yeah.
There is a great subject matter in that, and I think just to shout out to episode 80 with Casper Dixon, who was probably the most positive Lean Six Sigma person we've ever had on the show. It's a great episode to listen to if you're interested. But he did mention the very similar things. I think if you do break it down to compounds, you can use some of these methodologies. What I find interesting as well, ladies, is that the methodologies that are being taught aren't necessarily the methodologies that are being used. And what I mean is there's always a difference and a gap between academia and experience on projects, right? That on the job skill set. You mentioned right people, and I'm wondering what's the ratio mix from your perspective? Is it 60-40? Is it 50-50? How much of the academia really applies to the real project environment, and whether it's a mega project? You know, I was talking to a guy who's also fantastic, Dale. You remember Simon White? We talked about theory of constraints. We talked about the methodology and little laws of productivity, and you talked about process efficiency, so Six Sigma and that kind of stuff. How do the methodologies or the institutes today that are kind of spruiking on about these agile and waterfall and knowledge area management areas or methodologies, how are they applying that in the real world? So there's two questions there. One is around the ratio between academia and experience, and the other one is what's the right methodology that we should be using on projects?
I'll leave it to the first one, and I'm going to jump to I'm going to go with the second one, because it goes back to what I was saying before. I think it's about recognizing there are many ways to skin a cat, and you need to understand what they are and where they're best used. And this is where, and I did write a paper on this for my master's around professional judgment, about being able to say, well, I understand all of the best practice. I understand the context within which we have to deliver projects and programs. And I'm going to do something that actually isn't best practice. It's good local practice, which is based on that best practice and academia. And academia is fed by what happens in the real world, and there is a kind of a bit of a lag, and then it kind of continually kind of morphs into that. And I think, again, I think that's where the PMO can really help organizations about saying, actually, all of that stuff's out there. These are the kind of the 3 different types of projects we do here. Therefore, we're going to have 3 different ways of delivering projects in our organization.
Yeah, and my argument is that, okay, we go on these things about bashing the fact that there's so many of these training courses, but if you don't know it, how can you then have good practice? Because what is it based on? You've got to get your knowledge from somewhere, whether that be a formal training course or reading a book or whatever it might be. But just to dis and say, well, actually, there's too many certs out there, there's too many of this, that, and the other. But to ignore it, because to be fair, most people in project management, the last time we did an annual survey, most people don't have qualifications. They don't have anything. So
but if you go back to the definition of a profession and about what a profession is, it says you will have a body of knowledge that you refer to, and professionals refer to that body of knowledge, use professional judgment to apply it in the context within which they're working. And so I think the academia and all of those methods are absolutely it's getting bigger as we speak, that great body of knowledge. And the real skill then is, and this is where I think organizations have a bit of a dilemma, because you either let each project manager pick it for their own project, which can be a bit wild, or you have a PMO who says, well, actually, we have an overall framework. Within that framework, there are various options, and we'll help you work through the options for your particular project. And what we find in kind of low maturity organizations is actually a lot of things are mandatory. As you get more mature in delivery, you get more optionality, and you use the kind of the project managers, the sponsors, and the PMO's professional judgment to say, based on that, we can now understand which options are best for this project. But that overall kind of framework that your organization works within is where the PMO, I think, provides that wider support and filters all of that kind of academic stuff.
Yeah, that it is a tricky one. I mean, I don't mean to set you up for that, but it is a difficult one around exactly how you educate people, and whether you take the academia route or whether the apprenticeship trade scheme methodology is a little bit better. If you think about how competency logs and on-the-job recognition and observation of that is reinforced, that could also be useful, because, as you said, local knowledge is almost better than an overarching schema. And some of our previous guests as well, and this is just speculating, we don't know, we're complete idiots, me and Dale, and we're curious about what would work. David Snowden, he talked about this Kinefin framework he kind of put together, and he talked about how not everything can fit within a framework. And Dale and I kind of talk about this freedom within a framework. We kind of want some level of flexibility, because obviously we know academia kind of lags in some areas. And I wanted to get to, I mean, I could talk about that forever, but I want to get to innovation and how technology plays a role in this, because arguably you would say technology is super important. Every project could take advantage of that. There's efficiencies, there's gains, there's improvements, there's enhancements to your role, your skill set, there's automations, etc. I'm not sure, I haven't been convinced yet that PMO teams are qualified to roll out innovations in the digital space. How would you comment about that? And do you think that there's another team then that is forming on the sidelines of this? Very much like PMO, we think as a normal service, it's just like, yeah, you've got to have a PMO now. Is there another team forming that would bring in the new digital era? The reason I say that is, if you think about all the other areas that we think of standard roles, all of those jobs have degrees. There's no degree for a PMO. So you can go to finance, you can go commercial, you can do project management, you can't do PMO. It's almost a subset. So I'm just interested in what you think about the digital element, and does that fit into the PMO framework, or is that a separate department itself?
I want to go back to kind of what we said earlier, what I said earlier about the PMO being that kind of overriding kind of bit that draws everything together. So the controls can have their own department. You bring a bit of, there's some services from finance, and there's some service from HR, there's some services from IT. And I think the kind of the middle ground, the new department that's coming, is the data analytics. And we had this kind of conversation, didn't we, about, do you have somebody in project management and then teach them data analytics, or do you do data analytics and teach them kind of project management? And there's an argument for coming both ways.
Yeah, I mean, we've been talking to somebody recently, and what they've done, because of the nature of their business anyway, they'd already got a massive team of data analysts. So what they've done, we've been allowed allowed to go and talk to that department from a project department to talk about, well, you know, you're doing this kind of data stuff for the business as usual. How can we try and utilize some of this internally for our own ops? So
and that's
one way it gets started.
Yeah, and the supermarket that I work for, or work with, sorry, they're interesting because they have massive data analytics about their stores, and, you know, almost they can count how many footsteps their staff have taken around the stores. And it's interesting because some of the way they use artificial intelligence absolutely could be applied to projects. So there is a team of data, as you say, data analytics, data specialists already there. It's about kind of using some of those skills in a project environment.
Well, if you look at, I mean, in my background, you know, spent quite a bit of time in terms of recruitment, and what you find a lot is that people wanting to get into project management because they've been working in their day job, whatever that might be, and they've been given an opportunity to work on a project, probably as a subject matter expert most of the time. But when that project's come to an end, they're like, well, actually, I really enjoyed this experience, and I want to do more of it. So I don't actually want to go back and do a day job 100%. I want to carry on this journey. I seriously think that that's probably the way that it'll happen, is that if you've got data people already, because I believe that PMO, most PMO people will probably don't want to go down the route of being a data analyst. There'll be some that really enjoy that kind of, you know, quite introspective work and whatever. But I honestly think we'll end up recruiting, because we've talked about it before, haven't we? But actually, you should probably go out there and recruit a data analyst into your PMO team.
But you'll have to match them with somebody who does that kind of translation and the storytelling.
Yeah.
And does that kind of wraparound to make it palatable.
But the alternative is that you bring somebody in from the business that might be getting itchy feet, who have been working around data for a while, and say, you know, do you fancy being seconded into the project departments for a while and just seeing where we can use your expertise? That's what happens in businesses all the time. So why wouldn't you kind of utilize some of the people you've already got?
And I think that there's always a danger that the PMO gets seen to be empire building, because obviously data analytics is part of us, controls, they're part of us as well. Yeah, finance, we need that part as well. And I think this is to be a really good PMO, you have to recognize that you're perhaps doing the coordination of that and making sure it all links together with all of the other functions and services that the PMO deliver, rather than having everybody say, I work in the PMO.
It's an ultimate thing that's overlooking in most organizations. It's matrix management. So it's only matrix management from a project point of view. So, you know, it's...
Yeah. I think I failed on my basketball analogy before, but maybe I'll just use another one. I think there's something around PMO being a temporary endeavor. You know, we're a little bit like special forces, where we're there to kind of bring everything together, get the logistics organized, make everything standardized as an operation, and then we need to exit. And I think actually PMO as a service is looking a lot more attractive, particularly in Australia. I'm not sure what the UK is like. You know, some people would like to say, I think, you know, as you said, they'd like to build empires out of PMOs, and certainly they do. They sometimes overreach, but like every other organization, it happens. And it's because PMO is malleable, and you do get very versatile people who have these fusion skills who could probably pick up finance relatively quickly, or even commercial, or planning, or risk, or even data analytics and data science. But to see whether or not that's actually going to be a formidable permanent fixture, I'm not sure yet. And the interesting would be whether or not digital, and as you said, data science, will learn ways to improve projects without PMO first, before PMOs learn to adapt project data science and data analytics to projects. So there's a bit of a race, I think, in terms of who will own that space. But Dale, do you have any comments on
that? Just to comment on, you know, Val, do you know anyone that hired a data analyst into their project controls and PMO team?
Data scientists? Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, we actually did that. We actually did that about 4 years ago, and it was foreign to the business we were working with. They're like, why would you have a business analyst in PMO? And we did it. And we bridged the gap with the storytelling bit. And you know, we know PMO, he didn't, he knew data, but it was great. And now it's great to see that that's being discussed and adopted. But I love this conversation because there's so many discussion points, and I think it just comes back to what we're saying in the beginning. It all depends. What's the context? There is no right and wrong answer when it comes to PMOs and how to effectively have them in your organization. What's the right mix? All that kind of a thing. it's and this is why we love it. It's fun. But
Just sorry, Dale, to interrupt, but I can't let Val get away with what he was talking about.
Oh, I was going to say data properly first.
Well, yes, rather than this data nonsense. But anyway, what I do want to pick up on is about, you said about PMOs being kind of almost the kind of teams that kind of come in and kind of help, and you know, this permanency business, and I think that is a complete misnomer, and because yes, you have temporary teams that help a temporary entity, which is the project, and a temporary team which helps a temporary program, but you need a core PMO who maintains the overall standards, frameworks, processes, procedures, maintains that kind of historical data around all of the projects that have come, because if you've got a temporary project and they disappear, so what happens to all of that kind of project information? So you do need some permanent PMO structure, typically called either an enterprise PMO or a kind of a portfolio level PMO, that is there as a permanent entity, which may be and hold the resources where you set up these temporary teams to support your projects and programs. But I don't want your listeners to think, well, actually, if I go and work in a PMO, it's only going to be temporary, because there are, and I think this is the learning from organizations, actually, we do need a permanent team of PMO people to make sure that we continue to take those learnings from project to project.
And they're good comments, and it's good to debate, because I think, you know, listeners want to hear both sides, because they will go, well, how big is a PMO, and how big or how small should they be? Are they permanent? Are they, you know, short-term endeavors? And I think for different projects, as you said, they are different layouts, and you know, it is a topology. It's going to be a different layout for each project. But I do say that I think the digital race is going to be an interesting one. I mean, we are all observing, almost like we can't control the speed in which digital is changing projects. And I think once the data landscape is in place, I think there'll be probably an enhanced role. Maybe it won't be called PMO, maybe it'll be called something else, but I think there'll be an enhanced role for PMO, and there'll definitely be room for poo and pots on either side of that. Maybe not so much in the peak periods, but definitely on the side of either side. And I've remembered those acronyms, so thanks for sharing those.
They are amazing, Val, because I was thinking exactly that, right? Poo and pot. And I was actually thinking, well, if you have 4 and it's POOF and it's poof. But anyway, we digress a little bit. I just wanted to comment as well on what you said previously, Eileen, around professional judgment as well. And that's probably a whole podcast on its own, because you get different levels of professional judgment based on different levels of experience.
And do you know the funny thing about professional judgment, Dale? It's not taught in project management.
No, it's not.
It's taught in lots of other social sciences and the medical industry. We don't teach it to project and program managers about what professional judgment is, how we should develop our professional judgment, and how we should be held accountable for using that professional judgment on projects.
Yeah, absolutely. Look, I mean, we could chat for hours because we love the space. We're all passionate about PMOs, where they should be. We could have amazing debates, because that's what we love to do about you know, all facets of PMO. There's a whole bunch of questions I still have, but I know we are limited for time. So what I do want to do is bring in Mr. Martin Curriston for our feature, and it is a lot of fun. So Martin, over to you.
Thanks, Dale. Yes, this is our guest feature called Defend the Indefensible. It's where we ask our guests to argue for a ridiculous statement for 30 seconds. It's inspired by some of the ridiculous things we've all heard over the course of our careers. I'm sure you've heard one or two, probably over the course of the last hour. So if you're willing and keen, let's make a start. We'll have one.
Do we have multiple of these to do, or just
one?
Yeah,
just one, but one each.
Okay.
So, you know, we've been very democratic. So I'll start with Eileen. So your statement to argue for 30 seconds is: we don't need PMOs. They stop progress on projects. Discuss.
Okay. So I'm a well-paid project manager. I know how to deliver my project. I need some admin support to book my hotels, but I do not need a PMO telling me what to do. That's what I've been trained to do. It's me who's held accountable for whether the project is successful or not. And I can't have my choices being overridden or influenced by somebody who's not accountable for delivery.
Brilliant. Thanks a lot. Cheers. Okay, Lindsay.
This is awful. You can do this kind of stuff. It's just, it's just training all the time. You can just
Argue with delegates.
Brilliant. That's good thinking, arguing for and against. Lindsay, your statement to argue for 30 seconds is PMO certifications are a waste of time as they don't align to the organization's goals. Discuss.
I've got to argue for that. Oh gosh. I'm really terrible at this. I'm the person that
help her out.
It'd be really awful.
What would you say about no, you don't need PMO certification?
You don't need PMO certifications
You can
because
learn from the project
well, it's not just that. Is that every PMO is different. So how on earth could you have a certification that covers off how to work in a PMO if we're all different? So yeah, and certainly in terms of our organisation, we're weird and wonderful, and we probably just put people on a project management one, because isn't that what PMO people do ultimately? So there you go. Yeah, I'm so there you go. Oh, I feel really sick. I'm just like
Awesome. Thank you for being such good sports, because it is a bit of fun at the end. We just challenge ourselves in our thinking, and it does get the juices flowing. And it has been an amazing podcast to delve into these various rabbit holes, because we discuss them, not only us, but others out there in the PMO space every day, every week. So it's good to get the insights, ideas, and thoughts of everyone out there. So thank you for that. But we are heading to the end of the podcast. And before we let you go, Eileen, I'm going to come to you first. Any final thoughts you want to leave our listeners with?
No, I just think recognize that they're all different. I think we've said several times today. Just make sure you know what you want yours to do.
Yeah, and then from my point of view, like I said, it's the people side that I really enjoy in getting people together. Just so you know that there are obviously people that work in PMO all over the world, and the one great thing that I've learned about it over the last 20 years is that they love to share. They love to share what their stories are and things like that. More than project managers, I would say. They're a bit more open and warm and welcoming, often because there might be poos or pots. So we'll leave you with the poo or pot. And if you're really into the whole PMO stuff, just check out House of PMO, because there's people there that are exactly like you, and exactly like you guys too. We like a bit of a debate and a challenge and a bit of a laugh, and and so yeah.
Absolutely. Thanks. Yeah, thanks, Lindsay. And I agree with you. And I think that's why we're in the space as well, because we actually have those debates with project managers all the time, every day when they're delivering, as to why they shouldn't be doing what they're doing, because this is the other side of the story. So we thank you for bringing that to this episode as well. So folks, that is all the time we have on this episode, but remember to hit subscribe before you go. A massive thank you to our guests, Eileen Roden and Lindsay Scott, and thank you all for listening. Till next time, we say stay safe, be disruptive, and have fun doing it. From me, Val, and Martin, it's bye for now.